My name is Emily, and for a long time I believed that my life was complete. I was married to David, a man I had known since college, and together we had a son named Michael. When Michael was born, everything seemed to fall into place. We were not wealthy, but we were stable, and there was comfort in the ordinary rhythm of our days. David worked as an engineer, and I balanced part-time jobs with raising our little boy. Our house was small but warm, and on weekends we would go to the park or bake cookies together or simply sit in the living room watching cartoons. I felt that this was what happiness looked like, the sound of a child's laughter echoing in a modest home filled with love. But life has a way of changing without warning, as if it delights in testing the limits of what a person can endure. For me, that change began when Michael was around 5 years old. At first, the signs were small. He was more tired than usual after playing. He bruised easily, sometimes from the gentlest bumps. He caught colds often, and his fevers seemed to last longer than they should. I tried to tell myself it was nothing, that all children had phases of getting sick, but in the back of my mind, there was a persistent unease. One evening, as he was playing on the carpet with his toy cars, Michael suddenly collapsed. My heart froze. I rushed to him, scooped him up, and felt the terrifying heat of fever radiating from his tiny body. His breathing was shallow, his skin pale. I called David, who told me to take him to the emergency room immediately. That night changed everything. After hours of tests, blood work, and nervous waiting in a sterile hospital corridor, a doctor finally came to us with words that shattered the fragile sense of safety I had carried all my life. Michael had leukemia. The doctor explained the treatment plan, the long hospital stays, the medications, the possible bone marrow transplant, and the uncertain prognosis. I felt as if I had been thrown into an ocean without knowing how to swim. My only thought was that my baby was sick, and I had no idea how to save him. The months that followed were a blur. Michael was admitted to the children's ward for long stretches. I lived at the hospital, sleeping in a stiff chair next to his bed, listening to the constant beeping of machines. I learned to read lab results, to administer medications, to hold him still during procedures, even when my heart broke at his cries. My entire existence narrowed to his illness. The world outside seemed irrelevant. I no longer cared about clothes or gossip or news. All that mattered was fighting for his life. David tried at first. He visited, but not often enough. He said he was working long hours to keep up with the bills, and perhaps that was true, but I also knew he could not handle the atmosphere of sickness. He hated hospitals, hated the sight of tubes and needles, hated feeling helpless. While I forced myself to adapt, to function no matter how terrified I was, he seemed to retreat further into avoidance. Our conversations grew short and strained. He asked fewer questions about the treatments. Sometimes, I realized with a dull ache, he didn't even know what stage Michael was in or what the doctors had just told me. Meanwhile, the financial strain became overwhelming. Insurance covered some things, but not everything. Experimental treatments, special medications, additional consultations, they all came with bills that made me dizzy. I filled out endless forms for assistance, reached out to charities, begged for extensions. I learned how to stretch every dollar, cutting out anything unnecessary, but the anxiety of money never left me. I often lay awake at night, calculating, worrying, bargaining silently with God or fate. Then came the day David said he was leaving. He told me he couldn't live like this anymore, that the constant stress, the hospital, the looming fear of death was too much. He said he felt suffocated, that he needed space, that he wasn't strong enough for this life. I will never forget standing in the doorway as he carried a bag out of our house. My knees felt like they might give way. The man I had built a life with, the father of my child, was abandoning us at the moment when we needed him most. After he left, I felt as though I was made of glass, ready to shatter at the slightest touch. I cried in bathroom stalls, in hospital corridors, in the car parked outside the pharmacy. There were moments when I wondered if I could go on. I had no partner to lean on, no one to share the crushing responsibility. Friends offered sympathy, but they had their own lives, their own children, and their support was fleeting. My parents were too old and far away to help beyond phone calls. I felt desperately alone. Yet in the middle of this despair, there was Michael. His little hand would reach out for mine, his eyes filled with both pain and trust. He still smiled at cartoons. He still asked for his favorite story before bedtime, even when his eyelids fluttered from exhaustion. He still believed that I could protect him. That belief became my fuel. No matter how broken I felt, I could not let him down. I began to live day by day, sometimes hour by hour. I submitted more applications for financial aid, searched for clinical trials, contacted support groups. I stopped caring about pride. I was willing to beg if it meant Michael could get the treatment he needed. Every small victory, a grant approved, a donation received, felt like a lifeline. Slowly, we managed to piece together enough to continue. It was during one of those desperate fundraising efforts that I met James. He was a volunteer at a community event organized to help families like mine. At first, I barely noticed him. My focus was entirely on getting through the day, on making sure Michael had what he needed. But James noticed me. Unlike others who looked at me with pity, he looked at me as though I was strong, as though he recognized the fight inside me even when I felt like I was collapsing. He offered help without condescension. He listened when I spoke, not only about Michael's illness but also about the exhaustion, the fear, the loneliness. Over time, James became a constant presence. He drove us to appointments when my car broke down. He brought groceries when he knew I had no time to shop. He sat with Michael so I could take a shower without rushing. He never asked for anything in return, never made me feel indebted. Slowly, almost against my will, I began to lean on him. And even more slowly, I began to feel something I thought had died inside me: hope. James did not replace David. He was something entirely different. He was steady, dependable, and unafraid of the hard parts of life. He did not run from sickness or sadness. He faced them head-on, and in doing so, he gave me the strength to keep going. Michael grew to love him too, sensing instinctively that this was a man who would not leave. The road was still long and brutal. There were nights in the hospital when I thought we might lose Michael. There were endless tests, more treatments, side effects that left him weak and frail. But through it all, James stayed. He held my hand when I cried. He lifted Michael into his arms when he was too tired to walk. He reminded me that I was not alone, that together we could shoulder the weight. Years later, when I look back, I see not only the suffering but also the transformation. I learned how resilient I could be. I learned that love is not proven by words but by actions, by showing up every single day even when it is unbearable. David's departure nearly destroyed me, but in the space he left behind, I discovered my own strength and the unexpected love of a man who chose us willingly. Michael's journey is not over. He still needs follow-up care, and we live with the reality that the illness may always linger as a shadow. But he is alive, he is growing, and he still laughs, and that is more than I once dared hope for. When I tell this story, I do not paint myself as a hero. I was broken many times. I doubted, I despaired, I wanted to give up. But I kept moving because of the small hand that held mine and the new hand that reached for me when I was falling. My life did not turn out the way I once imagined, but in its painful, messy, and imperfect way, it has given me a deeper understanding of love, loss, and survival. This is my story, the story of a woman who nearly surrendered but found the courage to fight on. It is the story of a child who endured more than any child should, and the story of a man who stepped in when another walked away. Most of all, it is the story of how, even in the darkest moments, life can still surprise you with light.